Are we okay to go, Nikki? Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. I'm just going to inform everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and broadcast live on the internet and will be available for repeat viewing on the Council's website. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during a webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. Members of the public are only able to speak if they have registered their intention in accordance with the Council Procedure Rule 36A, Public Speaking at Planning Applications Committee. As Chair, I have the discretion to adjourn the meeting in the event that there is any disorder from councillors or members of the public in accordance with Standing Order 34 and 35. I can also terminate or suspend webcasting of the meeting in accordance with the webcasting protocol. I hope none of that will be necessary. Right, thank you. Before we get on to the agenda, I think Councillor Page wishes to make an announcement and suggestion ahead of the rest of the agenda so that we don't waste people's time if they're here for something that won't necessarily be discussed. Councillor Page.
Chair, I'd like to propose that agenda item 10 relating to 109A Oxford Road is deferred. At our last meeting when we considered this, namely on the 28th of April, we deferred it for 4 reasons. For further information on noise, including the noise assessment, which we've got information back tonight, to allow further discussion with the owners of the property to explore what steps could be taken to achieve the public realm improvements expected when the 2014 permission had been granted. That information has still not is still due. And then for more general policy advice about the what protection was offered in the local plan regarding the loss of these uses A1 and A2 and the proliferation of takeaways in this area of the Oxford Road, and to report on general terms on the provisions within the local plan to similarly protect all shopping areas in the borough. And then there was a final point about more information on permitted development rights for restaurants and pubs changing use to takeaways. At least 2 of those points are still outstanding, I would suggest, Chair, and on that basis I would propose a deferral for that information. And the final point is this committee is being treated with a certain amount of contempt by the applicant, who has not shown us the slightest courtesy in either representing himself or be represented due to the level of concerns from local residents. So I would suggest that's a further reason. It might get the message across to the applicant that he should attend this committee or be represented when we next consider the application. So I would move deferral for those reasons, Chair.
Thank you. I'm happy to second that from the Chair. Are people happy to agree that? Agreed. Thank you very much. Yeah, they did all wave their hands. Do you want to wave your hand? Right. Thank you for that, and we won't waste people's time later on. Right, that takes us on to the minutes of the last meeting on page 9. Are we happy to agree those? Thank you. And are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Emberson.
Yeah, on Circuit Lane, as the lead councillor for housing, I'll abstain on that item, as I usually do.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other declarations of interest? Councillor, sorry, I can't see your hand. Councillor Stanford-Beale.
Just that I'm currently a non-exec director of Reading Buses, and I just wanted to mention about buses in item 17. Thank you.
If there are no other declarations of interest, we go on to questions. There are none at this meeting. And then there's item 4, potential site visits on page 15. Julie Williams to introduce this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's a number of sites or plan applications listed on your pages. I've checked with officers and none of those are likely to be coming to committee in January. So what we will do is to provide you with information nearer the date when they are likely to be coming to committee to recommend which ones should be site visited. The majority of those can be easily seen from the street if members would like to do that. And if members also feel that they could do with a briefing note to accompany them and doing their walkabouts, then obviously they'll have to provide that for you in the interim. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to comment on that? Councillor Page.
Chair, can I just raise a query in respect of the Battle Ward application, the land to the rear of 303 to 315 Oxford Road? I'm not too sure how accessible or viewable this is, other than getting, and so how accessible it is for viewing. So an organised site visit might be necessary in order to gain access. That's the point that I'm raising. I stand to be corrected. I know the general location, but I can't visualise its accessibility. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. That was the one, the case officer Ethne Humphreys did say that of all of those, that one would require an accompanied site visit to go inside. Obviously, you won't want to go in the garages, but you would need to go onto the private land. But as I say, we're not sure yet when that's going to committee. So rather than have you going in December, just before Christmas, I think the due date for site visits, we will bring that forward maybe as part of a reserve list to be visited in January. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think we probably would all benefit from looking at the Delwood site, which is quite an important site in West Reading and of historic value to a number of us. Anything else on site visits? In which case, no. Can we note that and move on to...
Sorry, Chair, just to clarify then, so are there going to be briefing notes for all of these that are unaccompanied site visits?
Yes, so I think we would want briefing notes. Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, yes, I will.
Yeah.
Us on to planning appeals on page 19. Julie Williams to introduce this one as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got nothing to add to this report. We've had no further appeal decisions come in since the report was drafted, and we have recorded their appeals that we've had submitted to us, and no more updates on that either. Thank you.
Any questions or comments on any of that? No, thank you very much. Note that to applications for prior approval on page 23.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing to add to this report. Thank you.
Any comments, questions? No, can we note that then? Thank you. And then we go on to the 3 reports on the local listing of buildings and structures, which there's the general report on page 29 and then the 2 specific sites that follow on from that. So I believe Bruce Edgar is going to speak to these reports.
Sorry, Chair, it's me who's doing the first one, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
So this is an information item on the process for making additions to the list of locally important buildings, and it follows on from the discussion at Planning Applications Committee in December last year around options for that process. Committee agreed the broad outline of the new process, which involves committee making the final decision on nominations for the local list, but delegated the detail of that process to the Deputy Director for Planning, Transport and Regulatory Services. So this report sets out the detailed process which has been introduced. Although it's been finalised and in place since May, this evening's the first meeting which will consider any of these nominations. And the process is set out in full in Appendix 2 of the report. In summary, once a nomination is received, consultations are sent out to the landowner, ward councillors, Conservation Area Advisory Committee, civic society and any other relevant community groups. There are then 28 days for responses, after which the report is brought by the Conservation and Urban Design Officer to Planning Applications Committee to decide whether or not it should be added to the local list. And if committee decides it should be added, that will take effect immediately. And the website will then be updated as soon as possible and notice given to the landowners and other consultees. At this point, we're now working our way through the nominations that had already been made for local listing, and there are 2 proposed that are coming to you tonight. And we anticipate that further buildings will be brought to forthcoming meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've had a report on this before, so are there any questions that people haven't been able to ask before, but otherwise good to see them coming through, I think. Yep, thank you. So can we note that, please, and move on to the specifics. Item 8 is Atwell's drinking fountain, and I believe Bruce is going to introduce that one. Is that right?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Atwell's drinking fountain, you've got copies of the listing applications, so if you'd like me to go through those in detail, I will, but for
No, I think you can assume we've all read it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Just checking. Okay, Atwell's drinking fountain is based down the Ocean Bridge, and it's a late Victorian memorial fountain to one of the former mayors of Reading. It's high Victorian, granite columns, very fine detailing, and it's a fine example of its type of memorial fountain that you'll find. There's a similar memorial in St Mary's Butts, which is a Grade 2 listed one, but this is a locally listed one, which is very significant to the community. I've had extensive discussions with CAC over the last year about wanting to list this building, and it ticks a number of the boxes. It's a memorial to the local mayor. It's a fine example of craftsmanship of its time. It's in a prominent location down near the bridge, down near the Swan Colony, and it has high public exposure. And that's the main reasons that we want the listing. Any questions?
Thank you. I'm just going to say, has anybody got any questions or comments? Councillor Rowland?
No, I would, thank you, Chair. I would just like to thank officers for their work and thank all interested heritage persons for their, I assume, Chair, that we're allowed for open discussion here of this? Okay. I don't have any particular questions for Mr. Edgar at this time on this, but I do think it's really important that we start ticking these off. I think this is an excellent example of something that we do need to be locally listing and protecting, given its heritage value that is spelled out on page 55. So I'm really delighted. It's a very special item, and I am delighted to actually say that we could tick off our first local listing item. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, I think silence is means everybody's happy with the proposal. I'm really pleased to see it coming forward at this stage, and yeah, thank you very much for the work on it.
I'd just like to say this is the start of an ongoing process, and we're very happy to have the support of the councillors and CAC in formulating this process.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. And then, so if we are happy to, can we see all those in favour of agreeing this proposal? Thank you, which takes us on to the second of these on page 59. And again, Bruce, to say a few words about this one, the King's Road Garden.
King's Road Gardens, which used to be known as the Hunter and Palmley Gardens, because it's an association with the biscuit factory. It was originally intended to be a social club associated with Huntley and Palmer, and the site was set aside and there were designs put for a social club, but this never happened. In the 1940s, it was bought by Reading Council, and it's probably one everyone drives by frequently, once a week or once a month. and whizzing by in the car, you don't appreciate the historical significance of this site, which is set against the Kennet Canal. But once you go and walk along the footpath, you can actually see there's some quite interesting 1930s Art Deco wrought iron railings. And in the photos, you can quite clearly see there's a little Huntley and Palmer emblem, and that's integrated into the quite nice wrought iron. Oh, it's not wrought. I think it's wrought iron steel work. If you look at the brickwork, it's quite a good example of 1930s period brickwork. It's an example of the master plan, town planning development of Reading in the interwar period. And it's highly recommended as an important item to Reading. It gets high exposure and has quite a associated history with the early development of Reading. And come springtime, it'll be a nice place to sit and have your lunch. So it's beyond that. We've chosen two items which are quite significant to the history of Reading for these two to start the ball rolling.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Page.
Chair, can I warmly welcome the report and thank Bruce Edgar for the work that he's done on this and the earlier report and the ones to come. Can I particularly draw colleagues' attention to page 74 and the paragraph that relates to what happened after Huntley and Palmer's left Reading, because the main building, of course, was demolished and subsequently became the Prudential and various other ownerships. And the building that's shown on the top of page 75 is now run by a social housing, by a housing association, and the land immediately in front was also gifted to the council, and that is now owned and maintained by the Borough Council. But the following paragraph refers to the campaign that was led in 1994 by one of the local residents, Mr. Ted Hancock, who was involved in the campaign that resulted in the successful saving of the building and also the retention of the garden. I had hoped to have been able to have seen Mr. Hancock here this evening, but he sadly passed away last weekend, and therefore I will be communicating with his partner, who obviously will be pleased to see the decision taken this evening to locally list something that he was particularly attached to. So, Chair, bit of sad news, but also a bit of welcome news that we are locally listing it. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly echo Councillor Page's comments on this. I have more of a question in regards to a technicality, actually, in section 4.36 and 4.37 relating to the form that was filled out and submitted by the CAC, and that would be on page 73 in regards to the group value item double I. In 4.36, it's talking that the Kings Road Garden does not fulfill the criteria of buildings and structures that are an example of deliberate town planning from before 1947, but yet in 4.37, it says that the gardens are a good example of deliberate town planning from before 1947 in the interwar period, which I do think is very, very important to that. And in terms of getting and ticking all our boxes and ensuring that they are correct, I would like to ask for a clarification on that. Ask whether the original application could be possibly amended to tick that box, if that's going to be shown, and then also in the final writing about the garden that is actually specifically mentioned, unless I'm misunderstanding something. So I guess the question is to Mr. Edgar as to that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that, Bruce?
Can we modify the text? You've got a copy of the text in front of you. This is the trouble with dealing with this remotely. We're looking at Appendix 3, aren't we? Now, can that be incorporated into that text to save things going backwards and forwards?
It's Appendix 4.
Oh, Appendix 4, sorry.
Page 73.
Sorry, Chair, I don't know if I can help. I would have thought if the error or the item that we're not sure if it's correct or not was part of the nomination form, and we are now here making a decision about locally listing, I would have thought it would be within our ability to be able to, when we do go forward to locally list it and confirm the description and why we've locally listed it, we can correct that. That's what I would have thought would happen.
I think Appendix 3, or at the beginning of the report, there is a description which will go on the website. Can we check against that, which is Appendix 3, I think. If you look at Appendix 3, I'm not sure what page it is on yours. If I can go back to Councillor Rowland and just check on the actual point, the clarification of the issue.
Councillor Rowland.
Chair, thank you. Yes, there's an Appendix 3 there. What I'm trying to ask is whether this is right or wrong, that we actually note that it is indeed an example of planning pre-1947, and that is incorporated, which I suppose officers could deal with, into the final recommended approved list, local listing. Whether it's right or wrong, or the wrong boxes are ticked and all of that. So
we can do
I do want it designated as that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, we can do a draft and run it by the chair of PAC, if you like, and Councillor Rowland before it's put on the website.
Shall we do that rather than make it up now? I think the point is well made and we need to be clear about that, but if we could agree this subject to the final announcements on the website or wherever else. Sorry, I've got Councillor Laing indicating now.
Yeah, just to finish off, I'd like to thank officers for their in-depth report. It sent me on a bit of a journey last night when I was reading through the papers. Page 80, there's some background into the Huntley and Palmer's social scheme. I'm always interested in communitarian type politics and what they're involved in. Also, there's a picture there and it states that, I can't quite make out the name, but a lost soul called Bert, who was killed at the Battle of Kohima, which I never even heard of. But normally when they mention battles in a single word, it usually means they're significant battles. So I did a bit of homework. I might not have the pronunciation right, but it was part of British India and it was listed as Britain's greatest battle and turned the tide against the Japanese in Asia. So that's a link to Reading. So anyway, I advise anybody to read up on it. It's fascinating stuff. Thank you.
So could I just say that thank you to Councillor Rowland, because the 1940s or 1930s master planning is quite a significant issue in relation to this site, and it's the latter day planning. So I'm very happy to look at changing that.
Don't see anybody else, so can we agree the listing and we'll sort out the wording that goes on the website and anywhere else that needs to be seen in conjunction with Councillor Rowland and the CAC, yes? Yeah. We happy with that? All those in favour? Thank you very much. Sorry, my thing's not come on. The first public speaking item is item 12, 56 Christchurch Road. And I believe that Tom Hughes is going to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the change of use of the ground floor of 56 Christchurch Road from a retail shop, which is a Class E use, to a hot food takeaway, which is a sui generis use, and the installation of an extract duct to the rear. In your update report, you'll see an illustration and a table below it, which indicate the uses of each of the units in Christchurch Road local centre. The units that would be in a hot food takeaway sui generis use as a result of this proposal would be numbers 56, 62 and 64 Christchurch Road. All the other units in the local centre fall within a Class E use, and this is based on the most recent local land use survey carried out by our policy team and subsequent planning records. It is regrettable that the proposals result in a loss of a retail unit in a local centre, but as set out in your report, proposals do accord with the active parts of policy RL3, which seeks to preserve the vitality and viability of such centres. Many of the representations that were received to the application raise various issues with regard to the impact of the proposed use on residential amenities. However, officers are satisfied that each of these matters, including noise and odour disturbance and waste and refuse management, can be controlled and monitored through suitably worded conditions, some of which will require further details to be agreed prior to the commencement of the use. Subject to these conditions, the officer recommendation is to grant planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We do have public speaking, as I said, on this item. The first person is an objector who is Terry Brown, I believe, is phoning in to speak rather than being here in person. So if we could ask Nikki Simpson to arrange that for us. Thank you.
Chair, it's she, and she just needs to unmute herself by doing *6, so hopefully she'll be able to do that.
Right, so are you able to hear us, Ms Hughes? Sorry, Ms Brown.
I'm no longer muted.
Right, welcome, thank you. You've been told you've got up to 5 minutes. You might want to just introduce yourself before we start timing.
Yep. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm not used to these procedures. My name is Terry Brown. I live in what is Whitley Park Lane and partly Sintra Close, so I'm a local resident. My query with this, I'm surprised because I don't understand, because they are obviously already operating and have been for a while, so I don't quite understand why we're still going to planning. But, however, my two problems are there are two extractors on garage level roofs on the rear of the property, and both of those extractors are directed at local residents and at a fairly low level. And I would have assumed that generally extractors go up to the sky. If you don't want the fumes in your kitchen, you don't want them in your residential area. So the fumes are not massive, but they're intrusive, and also the noise which goes on from the time it's turned on, about 11 o'clock in the morning. I don't know beyond 11 at night. They do go on after that, but I go into bed by 11. They're not massive, but again, are intrusive. I certainly have moved bedrooms to the back because you can't go to sleep with the noise. Plus the rubbish they've got two huge bins which are on the pavement, and with the cars parking, that makes it difficult. And now, because those bins are there, we've got 4 other bins also, and rubbish collecting bags and so on. So it's quite intrusive. I think that's what I need to say.
Thank you. Would you stay on the line? Well, you're very welcome to stay on the line to listen to the discussion anyway, but would you stay on for a minute in case there are questions?
Of course, I'm happy to answer anything. I'm sorry if I've made a muddle of it, but I've done the best.
No, I'm sure you haven't. And as you rightly say, you don't do this every week like we do. So we're very happy to help you through the process.
Could I just make one other very quick comment? Is I got the impression, I didn't understand it exactly, but there are like probably at least 5, maybe 6 takeaway food outlets now, which, you know, in our complex, it's not 2 or 3. So I just wasn't sure I didn't quite understand the person who was saying how many there are there, but there are certainly at least 5 takeaway food outlets on our small parade of shops.
Right, then we'll ask the case officer to respond to that in a minute.
Okay.
But, are there any questions? Councillor Carnell.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Brown, for your presentation. You touched on parking. This is a piece of road that I do know quite well. Could you comment some more on the parking along outside that parade of shops, please?
Yeah, so the parking, they come in diagonally, if that makes sense. And so because now there's just not enough room for a general standard car to park diagonally, so their front wheels go onto the pavement. Whether it's allowed or not, doesn't matter. That's what they do. So the distance between the bins and the cars is not enough for a disabled person to get through. One person can get through, maybe 2 at a squeeze if you're on a good day, but it is restricted. The bins out the front, they're on the pavement. We've never had bins on our pavement along there before, and because their huge bins are there, now we've got other bins arriving on the pavement, which is not very pleasant. And it's right near a bus stop, which doesn't help.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Brown.
Councillor McEwen, I think you had a question, and then Councillor Page.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Brown, for the your presentation there. That was really interesting and good to hear from you. I'm just, Councillor Carnell actually asked a question I was going to ask there because I wanted to speak to you about the bins and the parking as well. So, and also you were talking about the extractor fans and the impact that's had on the area. Yeah. No.
So, I mean, the extractor, the noise is, I mean, there is a smell. I mean, the Top Gear, the extractors go straight onto Top Gear tyres, which is, you know, a really tidy, clean business. And the customers now get out their cars and say, whatever. It's not, you know, it's not really awful, but it's unpleasant and it's there all the time, every day. And the noise is there all the time. Again, it's not a huge noise, but it is intrusive enough that if you've got a bedroom window slightly open, you know, it's unpleasant. And as I say, I've moved bedrooms, which I'm lucky to do.
Before we go any further, can I just get Tom Hughes to clarify, because from what you're saying, you're talking about a business that is operating at the moment, whereas what we're considering tonight is a nearby premises, but they're not in operation at the moment. Tom, would you like to just come in and clarify that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think what's being referred to there is at the next door premises, which is number 60 Christchurch Road. The application site is number 56, which is the sort of the detached building. Next door.
Well,
yeah, and the use that is subject to this application isn't yet operational, nor have the extract duct that is proposed, that hasn't been installed yet. So I think what's being referred to is the premises next door, who sort of who are currently operational.
Yeah, I've understood. I was talking about Slamburger.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's in existence. If there are issues of enforcement there, we can refer that across for officers to take a look.
That's what I've written about, and that's what I've referred to in all my correspondence.
Have you got any comments on the proposed
I don't know about the proposed one.
Oh, right, okay.
Sorry.
Does anybody else want to ask a
Sorry,
question?
there's not.
No, don't worry, we'll, anybody else? Yeah, Councillor Stamford Beale.
Thank you. Can we just ask the question? So would you be in favour of another takeaway opening up next door to the existing Slam Burger, which would have extractor fans and odour issues in likelihood?
No, please. I mean, honestly, it's such a lovely residential area, and that, you know, we understand that we're opposite in university and we've got students. All of that is good, but you know, we don't need another. The rubbish is the biggest problem of all. Parking is not helpful, and surely if there's more extractors, please no. That, you know, I know it's difficult to get other shops and so on, but we've really got enough takeaways now. There are, I'm trying to count them, but there are at least 5, if not 6. And, you know, it's just a disturbance to the local neighbourhood. It doesn't make the area look pleasant. We're trying to keep it looking and being a nice area to live in.
Okay, given we're talking about a different premises,
So sorry.
Don't worry. We will we'll make a reference across for that to be looked at as well. Does anybody else want to ask questions? Councillor Page.
Yeah, can I just ask, you say that there are at least 5 or 6 takeaways, presumably included in that are down at the far end. Doesn't the restaurant and the sandwich and snack bar at 80 and 82 operate some form of takeaway, but they aren't necessarily classified in planning terms as takeaways? Are you saying?
Sorry, I don't know the numbers. So we've got the bakers first, then we've got a Chinese takeaway, then we've got the Domino's, the Indian.
I'm talking right the way, sorry to butt in, if
the
you go
far
right
end,
the way down to the end, where North Court Avenue is, you've got the barber shop.
We've got the bakers.
Yeah, and then you've got the sandwich snack bar, which presumably you're classifying as a takeaway.
The sandwich snack bar next to the bakers is the Chinese restaurant that does takeaway.
Yeah, but yes, it's a restaurant that does takeaways from, okay. You're clarifying, you're confirming.
No, I mean, I would only count that as half, personally.
Well, yeah, okay, right. Okay, thank you for that. And
sorry.
You've raised some very legitimate concerns that we need to reflect on that are relevant to other applications as well.
The other thing, sorry, just to touch quickly, is that the parking isn't helpful because the poor souls who come to collect takeaways and so on, there's nowhere to park. So we've got the pub on the corner as well, so there's no parking for that. So people are parking all over the place to try to just for 15 minutes to collect their takeaway, but it's not helpful if they're blocking your drive or whatever.
Right. Well, I think thank you very much for, and we'll get back to you on what we can do to look at the issues around the other takeaway that you've raised this evening. If there are no more questions at this stage, can we go on to asking the applicant to speak to us? I've lost my bit of paper now. But you're very welcome to stop and listen.
So this is so now we're talking about the place on its own at the end.
Yes, it will. Yes.
Okay, I'll happily listen. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Mr. Cobbold, I think, is going to speak on behalf of the applicant, or is the applicant?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Would you like to introduce yourself, and then you've got, as you've heard, 5 minutes to speak to us. Thank you.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you, Chairman. I'm Nick Cobbold. I'm the planning consultant who's submitted the application and been in discussions with the case officer about it. Don't know where to start, really. I've just gone full circle with my notes listening to the previous speaker. I think it's important to note that she was misled or misunderstood the application site and the proposals which were put forward. Of course, she's got some comments which are valid, but I don't think I've ever had the scenario where someone's objected to an application site which isn't actually the application site. But nonetheless, we'll plough on. So it's a change of use of the ground floor from a use class E, which was formerly a shop, an A1 use, to a sui generis use. The applicant is Coffee Corner. That's the stated intention of the site, to be a coffee shop, but the way the planning system is, it needs to be more flexible. Hence the hot food takeaway application. It's a detached building, as you've heard. It's got residential above, and it forms part of the local centre. The ground floor has been unoccupied for the last 15 years, so it's not a recent COVID-related or anything like that related unoccupation. It's long-standing. So as a lawful planning use as a shop, which is in Class E under the updated use class order from 2020. You'll see from the committee report there was a previous refusal. The starting point, I think, is to note that the council's already accepted the principle of the change of use because it wasn't a reason for refusal before. Policy RL3 being your local plan policy, which was effectively rendered redundant by the changes to the use class order in 2020. As a policy which prevents the loss of the old A1 and A2 is obviously no longer effective because there's no change in use now required to go, amongst others, A3, B, 1A, C, B, a gym, a health centre, a nursery, all fall under the same use class. So as the restricted part of RL3 carries nil weight, the only requirement remaining is that the proposal must be for a town centre use, which it is, and that there are no more than 3 consecutive takeaways, which there aren't, as you've seen from the plan in the update report. I think it's useful just to clarify, I know one of the members questioned the previous speaker on it, but that she was referring to retail units and restaurant units, which are not takeaway units. The only takeaway units are the Sizzling Spice and Domino's, which are shown on the report in the update sheet. So it leads us to the previous reasons for refusal, which I'll quickly go through one by one. First of all, we had the question of the extraction equipment, and we've now provided full details and specification of what will be used. Obviously, we've got to caveat that with that there's no established end user, and therefore we provided generic cover which will deal with the preparation of most food. In the event that different equipment is required, which I think is unlikely, but there's a suitably worded condition which is on the committee report. In terms of the character of the area, there are no changes to the building proposed, with the exception of the small extraction equipment I just mentioned. Full details are provided of that on the elevations. It's very minimal visual change. In terms of noise, now the council knows the extraction equipment. Obviously, a judgment can be made about the noise which will emanate from that. Obviously, modern extraction equipment is far better than old ones which are dated and also have declined in quality with time. With the extraction equipment being internal and only a small external vent, I think the council could be pretty content that the extraction equipment is low key, and the noise report confirms that it's acceptable for an area which has residential properties around it. In terms of commercial waste, refuse and recycling for the new use will be stored in a dedicated storage area to the rear of the building. Food waste will be generated, no doubt, but the applicant will arrange with a private contract for this to be collected twice weekly, as recommended by the council's waste management guidance. The fifth and final reason for refusal was a highways-related one, not saying that there would be harm, but that it had not been demonstrated, in inverted commas, that no significant harm would be caused to the users of the surrounding highway network. So this has been addressed with an independent transport statement, which assesses the existing trip gen for the shop, if it was operating, and proposed trip gen for the proposed use. It's got its own parking to the rear, so comments we've heard about on-road parking, I think we need to be careful of worrying about the existing situation when this site has its own parking. So on that basis, we've had the 5 reasons for refusal, all addressed with technical responses. Any further control is secured by condition, which as I said, I've negotiated with the case officer. Therefore, please grant permission for this. I think it's a good proposal. It will tide the site up and it will aid the vitality and viability of the Christchurch Road frontage. Thank you.
Thank you. If you would like to stay on the line, there may be questions. In fact, I know there are questions from members. So, Councillor McEwen, did you want to go first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. I'm one of the local councillors, and we have been contacted by residents with regards to with concerns regarding this application. And you mentioned it, that you touched on the extractor fund, but there's still, you'll note it, 4.5, the concerns that people have. But you talked about the parking. I'm not sure, how we can. There's quite a few takeaways in the area and restaurants, so that's still a concern for people. So do we feel that's been addressed? And also the litter, that's a real concern for residents. So I'd just like more information. And about, you'll notice the noise disturbance as well. There's quite a lot of issues raised by residents.
Okay. Was there a question there though? What I don't really know what you want me to say specifically, because they haven't really asked a question.
Well, I think residents, you covered some of the issues, but I think the car parking and the increased traffic will still be an issue for residents.
Okay. Well, the transport statement, I don't know whether you've read it, but that's, as I said, it's done a trip generation exercise and concluded that the trip gen for a shop should the historic use, extant use, I should say, re-established, then the trip generation for a shop needn't be any different to the trip generation for the proposed use. So the like-for-like comparison is a nil detriment. In terms of the parking itself, there is a dedicated car park to the rear, and this is my point. None of the other properties in the Christchurch Road Terrace have any dedicated parking. They have the on-road parking, which we've heard from the objector, is diagonal and causes problems and issues on obviously quite a busy arterial road. In this case, there is a dedicated car park to the rear of the site, which there's no reason to believe people won't use it. And I think it would be used in preference to parking on street if as we've heard, the parking issues and the safety issues are significant. So it's a private car park to the rear with a dropped curb, accessed off a less busy street, if I put it diplomatically like that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Josh Williams next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you very much for speaking to us, Mr. Cobbold. My name's Josh. I think I've got a bit confused. I hope you can help clarify for me. Our report says that the sort of end user, the final business for this premises is not stated, is not known, and so we're just looking at a application for a takeaway use with no final business. Is that correct? I think you mentioned something called Coffee Corner. I don't know that business. Could you, if I heard that right, is Coffee Corner going to take on this premises, and what takeaway offer will they be looking to provide? Okay,
so both are right. The stated applicant is Coffee Corner. My client is Coffee Corner, and they intend to do a coffee and cakes and pastries, that sort of takeaway service for eating and consuming off site. So that is the applicant, but you're right, the committee report is right. There's no mechanism in the planning system to differentiate between, say, Coffee Corner and any other takeaway use, and that's why we've assumed a generic use, and the committee report has quite rightly assessed it as a generic use, because we can't commit to one end user, just like the council can't commit us to one end user, like putting a personal condition on, because that's not a reasonable approach to it. So yes, I am informed that the stated user and the intended user is Coffee Corner, but no, I can't commit to it for the reasons I've said, and because of the way the planning system doesn't allow such commitment in approving or in assessing an application such as this.
Right, I've got Councillor Page next.
Well, good evening. So why does the Coffee Corner use require an extraction duct if they're not doing any cooked food takeaway?
Because it is potential that it will need an extraction. the problem we have, that let's go back to the previous application. The previous application, we got refused and criticised by the council for not providing enough information to enable them to judge the impact of the application. So going back to what I've said to Councillor Williams a moment ago, by trying to be more precise and provide the details of extraction, and therefore noise derives from that, and then vehicle movements derive from what we're putting forward, etc., we had to commit to some sort of extraction equipment. Now, as I said in my 5 minutes of speaking, we took advice on that and came up with a likely solution in terms of extraction, which covers every use, okay, or the vast majority of uses. So again, whilst we have said it's coffee corner, we can't commit to it. Therefore, we have to plan for a worst case or a lesser case scenario than what we're putting forward. This was the agreed solution with the officers, saying, right, okay, this is extraction. This will work for the vast majority of uses, and then you've got the condition added onto the consent, which says if the changes, and this is dealt with by environmental health regulations, etc., for extraction equipment and uses, etc. If we need more for the future use, then that will be agreed with the planners, but also will have to be agreed through the license, etc. If the license is withheld because they say, well, actually the extraction equipment is not suitable for the proposed use in this location, then that use won't continue and can't continue under the planning permission. I hope that makes sense, but that's the reason for it. We're trying to respond to reasons for refusal, which accused us of not giving enough information. And I don't really want to be boxed into a corner saying, well, you've now given too much information for a use which we've tried to be helpful on.
Yeah, but you do accept that there is clearly the potential for extraction units to cause inconvenience and nuisance, either if they're installed to incorrect specification or they're not properly maintained. And we've clearly got an example of that only nearby. What the cause of the problem is, we aren't sure, but there clearly is a problem. And what we are looking to do, and I would invite you to reflect on the need perhaps for conditions that we can impose that safeguard the interests of residents whilst also enabling legitimate business to operate. And that's one of the difficulties that we have to deal with this evening. And the fact that you don't have an end user is an issue of concern, and that we'll have to come back to. But thank you for your explanation. That's helpful.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Rowland next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Cobble, for coming to speak with us this evening. I think that Councillor Page highlighted a lot of my concerns, whether this could be a coffee corner, which might be delivering lovely pastries, in which case the exhaust might actually be a pleasant odor, versus someone else that you might get that might not produce such a pleasant odor. And I'm a little bit concerned that you think you have actually provided us so much information here when we don't know what is coming in, and it makes it very, very difficult for us. I'm sure you can understand that we would need a robust, probably even a different type of extractor for odor and noise, were it to be two different end uses, depending on what you get in there. So you wouldn't actually want to have to purchase an extraction system that would be inordinately expensive and actually overkill for something that might be of lighter use or need. So I find it really, really difficult in that regard to sit down there and determine what that end use is going to be. My other question also comes in terms of the vehicle parking and the bicycle parking that you're saying that's out back. what kind of, I've read the transport situation here, but what kind of car / bicycle quantity are you expecting to be able to accommodate there, just roughly? I mean, how many cars, for example, might fit into that parking lot? I know that's not detailed per se because we don't have those. That's all, vehicle parking is all in conditions, but I just wanted to know your estimate because I'm not seeing the site personally. Thank you.
No problem. I think I took two things from that. I understand what you're saying about the end user, but I think you've got to understand it from our point of view and from a planning point of view, because the scenario that you set out, which is that we have to submit the worst case scenario for the worst case possible end user, is a scenario which quite clearly is not going to end up with getting planning permission. So we've got to find a compromise. But I say that because we can't commit to that end user again. So we've got to find a compromise here, which is why we've taken a best fit scenario which covers the vast majority. And I don't know what the committee or what the particular individual members have got in mind, which is a particular bad end user for a takeaway. I'm going to assume a curry house or something like that. But there's already a curry house 2 doors down, and we can't assume that it's going to be that. Just like we can't assume, as I've already said to the previous councillor, we can't assume that it's going to be a coffee corner. We have to find some sort of sensible compromise which enables permission to be granted and then enables the applicant who owns the site to see who wants to occupy it, whether it's coffee corner or someone else. And and it's a very hypothetical and low likelihood if let's say our curry house example comes forward and they say they want to occupy it, then that's where we've got the mechanism in the planning permission to agree the extraction, or even to say, sorry, we can't agree the extraction because it's going to be harmful to the surrounding area and you won't get an environmental health permit and you will not get the condition discharged. So that has to be the best way of doing it. Otherwise, you're just going to say, no, you're not having planning permission, and then we'll never find out who could be the end user, and the site will just sit there for another 15 years. We've given the best case scenario, and I think it's a fair representation of what is likely to happen. And if the unlikely happens, then you've got control of it through the conditions. That's the way the planning should function. In terms of the car parking, looking at it, my calculation is there will be 4 parking spaces to the rear of the site.
Okay.
Thank you. No, I'm fine.
I've got Councillor Carnell and then Councillor Emberson.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Rowland had asked the question regarding the parking spaces that I was going to ask.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Emberson.
Likewise, Chair, the challenge has been provided by other colleagues on the committee, so no question from me.
Good discipline, thank you. I can't see anybody else indicating, so thank you very much for attending. We'll now move on to councillor comments and see where we get to. Councillor McEwen, as ward councillor, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and obviously thank Mr. Cobbold for his presentation. I'm still, yeah, I mean, obviously, as I previously mentioned, we have had a lot of contact emails from very concerned people. I think there's a lot of concern about this application. I'm not an expert on extractor units, but I would have presumed that you need to know in advance what type of extractor unit you're going to get, depending on the restaurant, but you know, on the type of food you're serving. But honestly, I don't know about that. But there's still a lot of concerns for me with regards to obviously the extractor unit, the end user. 4 parking spaces probably isn't great, and I'm still not convinced about the litter. I wonder if it's worth, getting some further information and a report to assess the impact this application is going to have on the local area.
So that's a proposal to
Yes.
bring it back next time with more
Yes,
information, particularly
yes.
around the extractor.
The extractor
And
and
noise
the parking and
issues.
the litter
Yeah.
and general noise in the area, and just to really allay some of the concerns from local residents.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Page and then Councillor Josh Williams.
Chair, I know that this unit has been empty for the ground floor has been empty for some while, and clearly we would like to see it brought back into use. The use as a coffee shop at the more benign end sounds very attractive. I think the issue that is of concern to us and local residents is the whole issue of extraction units, the noise, the odour, the management, the maintenance of them. And indeed, had we not deferred the earlier item in respect of 109A, we would have already had a good canter around the course on those issues. The one thing that I would like to draw colleagues' attention to, and in supporting a deferral, I would like to suggest that the conditions that were drafted in respect of 109A and circulated to us in the update pack last night, for which I welcome, represent a great move forward in terms of perhaps a new template approach to new takeaways, because it references the need for assessments to be made in accordance with specifications, that the place can't be opened until a proper assessment has been carried out and a management plan agreed, an appropriate schedule of weekly cleaning, or it might be monthly cleaning, or fortnightly, depending on what is proposed. And that applies not only to odours, but also to the noise issue. And the final bullet point talks about a waste and litter management plan being submitted. And that covers the main areas of concern that we regularly get whenever there's a proposal for a new takeaway. And I would, in supporting or seconding Councillor McEwen's proposal for a deferral, invite planning officers to come forward with a set of conditions that set the generic and set the confines within which subsequent approvals might be given. And the applicant has said, well, we're not in a position to specify because we want to get the decision in principle. And we understand that. But on the other hand, we must have an approach and a set of conditions that can be enforced and also that give safeguards and reassurance to local neighbourhoods. Because it's quite clear that either through bad maintenance down the road or through a flouting of conditions, that something ain't working. And it might either be environmental health action that's required or planning enforcement action, but that can only be assessed against what has been approved. And I think we as a committee recognise that this and other applications need to be on a more rigorous basis that can be properly assessed and monitored. Chair, I would ask officers to look at that issue. Clearly there can be further discussions, but the conditions proposed for 109A represent, in my opinion, a good generic approach that we should be looking to take forward more or less in respect of future applications.
Okay, I think we'll come back to Councillor Josh Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And you don't need a thirder for that, but I'm very happy to support colleagues with deferring this. I think I heard right at the beginning Councillor Page defer the Oxford Road application for almost this exact reason, to understand exactly what protection we have from sort of runaway takeaways, if you like. And so that exact understanding applies to this as much as the Oxford Road, I think. So if a report is coming back, it would mirror on both applications. But I did want to say, a curry house is not the worst case scenario. I love a curry. There's no way that Indian food or any of the fantastic countries that make a curry are a worst case scenario for a takeaway. But exactly as the ward councillor and Councillor Page have said, it needs to be managed properly through conditions. So I'm just agreeing now, so I'll shut up. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not seeing. Do you want to say something, Julie or Tom?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Chair. If you don't mind if I butt in, Tom, before you do. Yeah. So I think this is an interesting thing because both 109A and this applicant have put in applications for what they want to do. I think the example that we had with the Slam Burger and the other change with the use class E, that they can change to a restaurant use without needing planning permission. So for Slam Burger, for example, they just had to apply for their extractor fans, except with external paraphernalia to enable that to happen. So in many ways, I think we should be thankful that these two applicants have actually put in applications and come clean that they are actually going to be doing takeaway. And because of that, and as the agent explained, because we have to deal with this as the worst case scenario, this could be any takeaway. And so I actually think, I actually think they have provided quite a lot of information about their extraction, and that the environmental protection team have looked at and have confirmed would be acceptable for the worst case scenario. What I took from when Nick Cobbold was speaking was that it could well be that the coffee use, if they are indeed the tenants, may not need an extraction system at all, in which case requiring that they install all of their paraphernalia with whatever goes with that wouldn't be what we want them to do. We'd actually would want them not to, because then that would limit their ability to do the cooking. So I accept why you want to have it deferred, but I don't think we'll be able to provide you with more information on that side. I don't think we can provide you more information than already in the report on the use class order shenanigans. It is a challenge for us because the sui generis, the ones that have changed to restaurant use, the use class order says should be mainly for dining in. It doesn't exclude takeaway use. And also during the pandemic, there were lots of relaxations to allow all sorts of premises to do takeaway. And that we had quite a few complaints from residents on Christchurch Road about units doing takeaway when they were meant to be just restaurants, but that was allowed during the pandemic. So we were in a very blurred situation here as far as what the restrictions are. So I for one would be disappointed if we defer this for the reasons you've asked, because I don't think we'll be able to come back to you with more information. And I would actually rather suggest that we look with the agent's agreement, and I think, Tom, I've spoken to the agent about the suggested conditions, because I realised that as soon as I launched the ones for 109A, that they would be, well, why can't we fit them on other sites? That if we were to go forward with the application, members could maybe change their minds, but reword the conditions to say before any ventilation is fitted, because I don't think we necessarily want them to put it in if they don't need it for the user who's going to take it on. But we need to make sure that should they need it, that at that stage it's installed in accordance with the criteria and the specifications of their submitted details. Thank you. I don't normally challenge these, but I don't think we're going to get very far.
Councillor Page.
But we're not asking for more information. It's precisely the full terms of the conditions. And at the moment, we have 4 words, 2, 4, 6 words regarding ventilation and extraction to be approved. That, I'm afraid, isn't adequate in terms of something as sensitive as this, and given the local concern. So we can't delegate unless I move formally that we passport the wording from 109A into this, which I don't think is appropriate, just to lift them all. But the thrust of what's proposed here is what we're suggesting should come back, and I don't think it necessarily inhibits the development of this property. But I don't see, Chair, how we can approve it on the basis And I would have thought that Wendy, even though she's not here this evening, would be the first to say that that isn't really clear as to why we can't delegate something that is as vague as that.
And there were other issues.
Unless sorry, through you, unless Julie's saying she's happy to see the wording for 109A effectively substituted. But that's what we're suggesting, because the whole point, sorry to labour this, but this condition talks about regular inspection for cleaning and maintenance schedules to be made available for inspection by council officers. That I know for a fact is not included in the draft conditions in respect of 56, is it? And that needs to be a standard element. It is a completely reasonable and proportionate requirement for you as a planning officer or an environmental health officer to see the schedule. And that's the sort of tightening up that we would want to see. It's entirely legitimate.
There were also other issues that Councillor McEwen raised.
Yes, I'm not saying it's the only one, but it's an
yes.
example of the sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's only fair that the applicant should be consulted on that as well. Hence the deferral, Chair.
Right, well, can I assume that we've had our discussion for tonight and that we need to take a vote on whether or not to defer this until next time? So all those in favour of a deferral, please put your hands up. Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? So I think that's a unanimous decision to do that. Also ask that perhaps next time we'll talk again about the different uses along there, because I do understand why residents get confused by this. They see people coming and going from other establishments that are primarily restaurants but do have an element of takeaway, and they wonder what on earth's going on and why one is called a takeaway and the other is not. So I think it's difficult for all of us. I think there's new set of rules, but we'll come back to that. Could we also make a referral regarding the points that were made by the lady that spoke at the beginning, a long time ago now, but about the other premises? Yes, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, I can confirm that we have had complaints regarding number 60 Christchurch Road. Environmental protection colleagues and planning enforcement officers are investigating the property. So yes, that is being looked into, and indeed I've spoken to Terry Brown separately about the matter. Thank you.
Thanks, that's good to hear. Okay, thank you. I think we have a way forward with that, which takes us on to the next public speaking item, which is item 14. And we have Alison Amoa as the case officer will introduce it, but we then have Chris Dodson and Mark Ashton who are objecting, and the agent is phoning in, Ed Mather. So we'll take the case officer's introduction first and then go on to the public speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The existing site comprises a large plot containing a large two-storey detached dwelling with an attached annex and garages. It includes trees and hedges to the boundaries and within the rear garden, and is covered by a tree protection order. The site slopes from west to east and is set down below the level of both Parkside and Westcott roads, such that the existing dwelling is largely hidden from view. Immediately adjacent to the site are two-storey dwellings at number 16 Parkside Road to the south and 29 Westcott Road to the east, with number 29 Westcott Road at a higher level than the application site. Slide 2, please. The proposal is the resubmission of a residential scheme considered by Planning Applications Committee in March of this year. The earlier scheme was for 12 units comprising 3 3-beds, 3 2-beds and 6 1-beds. And in summary, it was refused for 3 reasons in terms of its design, the appearance, bulk, height, massing and plot coverage being a harmful addition to the street scene, being overbearing and creating a loss of amenity through overlooking and loss of privacy to number 16 Parkside Road and 29 Westcott Road, and lack of a completed Section 106 agreement. Slide 3, please. The initial submission under this current planning application was for 11 units, and following the first consultation period, officers sought some further changes. An amended scheme was submitted for 10 units, which included a reduced footprint, a reduction of the overall mass and bulk of the roofscape, including closest to the adjoining properties, some window amendments, including some obscure glazed windows at first floor to the southern portion nearest to number 16 Parkside Road. This 10-unit scheme includes 8 2-beds, 3 of which would be of a size for 4 persons, 1 3-bed, 1 1-bed, with private balconies, amenity space and communal gardens. There would be the retention of a large majority of the boundary trees, with new trees proposed on the eastern and southern boundaries, and an overall landscape scheme. There'd be 12 car parking spaces, 8 cycle spaces and bin storage, and the proposal would include for PV panels, solar panels to the roof, and an air source heat pump. Slide 4, please. The residents' main objections and maintained following amendments relate to the design, the scale and height, the overall density, being overbearing, loss of privacy for overlooking, and the provision of insufficient family dwellings. Each of these matters is addressed within the committee report, but in summary, it should be noted that the overall density is consistent with similar nearby plots and would be just higher, 10 compared to just over 8, although obviously you have to round it down, than the indicative ranges set out in the local plan. There would be a good level of amenity space around the buildings, and the distances to neighbouring properties, as shown on the slide, are not only considered sufficient to not create an overbearing development, but create a similar relationship to number 16, in particular as the existing Parkside care home, which is to the south of number 16. The combination of a smaller footprint, fewer windows, some of which are proposed as obscure glaze, and reciting of balconies to elevations facing towards the roads are all considered to contribute to addressing concerns regarding overlooking and loss of privacy. The appearance of the scheme has been amended significantly compared to the refused scheme and has a much more traditional appearance, which scales down towards the adjoining properties and is considered to be sympathetic to the surrounding character, making a more positive contribution to it in accordance with relevant policies CC7 and H11. The overall footprint has been reduced compared to the previous scheme, and whilst the height is still different to the properties either side of it, its scale would not be unusual within the wider area, and it is considered it would not be dominating within the street scene. Transport has confirmed that parking provision would be acceptable, the overall amenity spaces would accord with policy, and the scheme would, along with a contribution to carbon offsetting, meet relevant sustainability policies. A Section 106 obligation for affordable housing or the provision of shared ownership units on site has been negotiated and agreed, and in addition there would be an obligation for construction skills. Slide 5, please. Officers are of the view that the proposal is acceptable subject to conditions and Section 106 as set out in the main report and is considered to address the reasons for refusal of the previous scheme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we now go on to public speaking. And first of all, I believe we have the objectors, Chris Dodson and Mark Ashton. If you want to come forward to the desk. And I think you know you need to share your 5 minutes, so if you need to swap over for distancing, that's fine. Won't knock it off your time. And yeah, if you could introduce yourself first, and then we'll start the timing after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
My name is Chris Dodson. I'm here with my wife Sheila. We've lived at 29 Westcott Road for the last 25 years. We know the site and the area extremely well. To find multiple online advertisements showing this site for sale with implied granted planning permission was a very unwelcome surprise. One has to ask, what do they know that we do not? It also suggests that the architect developer is already offloading the liabilities and difficulties in trying to build on what is not an easy site with poor ground conditions, TPOs and significant gradients in some areas of the site. The application for planning on this site by the same architect developer was rejected in March this year, as you've heard and as you know, because the building then proposed was deemed to be oversized amongst other things. The building proposed in this application is still substantially the same oversized building as can be seen from the south and east elevation drawings, particularly when seeing the outline of houses at 16 Parkside Road and 29 Westcott Road, which are superimposed. You can't see them on your briefing notes. You have to look at the actual drawings. The fact is that it is oversized because it has been designed to accommodate 10 or more flats. In summary, the current planning policies and guidelines that have been adopted by our council state that a maximum of 7 could be considered for this site, and 3 and 4 bed units should make up 50%, say 3 instead of just 1, as offered in this application. It is also worth noting that in Reading, 1 and 2 bed flats are now taking more than 5 times as long to sell as 3 and 4 bed flats, perhaps suggesting an oversupply. Arguments by the architect developer that the site is uneconomic unless the policy limits are exceeded to allow 10 or more flats to be built instead of just 7 means that they have overcommitted in the purchase price to the current owner and or are rewarding themselves too highly, the £1.1 million, the sum of which we now know from the advertisements. Once the planning officer chose to recommend the earlier application of 13 flats for grant, then that same planning officer really had no option but to recommend this case for grant also. This application should be rejected and any new application considered only when it complies with the council's agreed limits and guidelines with the correct maximum number of houses, flats and bedrooms that are specified in those relevant policies and guidelines, all of which we have listed in detail and correspondence. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. I mean, I'm conscious we probably need to have another desk next time, but perhaps Mr. Ashton would like to take your place, and then we'll do our best to ask the questions, if there are any of you both.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Mark Ashton from 16 Parkside Roads, here with my wife, Lisa French. We've been redeveloping 16 Parkside Road for about 8 years now. I just really want to hammer home the points that concern us greatly, which is specifically on our privacy and just the sheer size of the building that's been proposed. We know that there's a reduction in the number of units down to 10, a small reduction in the footprint, but we can't get over the fact that this thing's going to be very, very big next to our property. It's going to really impact the privacy of our garden and property. And we just find it slightly strange that in terms of the number of dwellings for that site, it proposed as 10, where, as we've heard, it should be approximately around 7. When we're looking at the number of 3 bed or more, there's only 1. With the original proposal, there was at least 3. So by trimming it down to 10, it just seems like we've removed all the family flats, which to me says that's evidence that it's just far too big for the site. It should be a much smaller design in keeping with the area, and that isn't going to completely destroy the privacy of number 16 and 29. As I say, well, I'm quite shocked as well that we saw the advert of the site on sale, almost kind of assuming that planning had already been granted. I hope that hasn't been the case, but it was very, very worrying to see it. I don't really have much more to add to that. It's the fact that we're so worried about the privacy, and particularly with all the work we've done on our house, we're just very, very concerned about what's going to end up there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for either of our speakers? Not seeing any hands. Sorry, Councillor Stack, sorry, you're directly behind Councillor Emberson. We need to get the desk shifted next
Going
time.
to move. There you go. Now you
Councillor
can see.
Stanford Beale.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming in this evening. I did visit you at the site visit last week. And the thing that did concern me was about the change in levels. The case officer said that there was a good level of amenity on site for this application. Now, the principal outside amenity area for the flats is going to be a circle of outside space, which is at the far corner. It's going to be the other side of the fence to Mr. Ashton's on the left-hand side of your garden, and it's going to be the right-hand side of Mr. Dodson's garden. Now, because of the change in levels between Mr. Dodson's garden and the applicant's site, we turned round and looked up and had a direct view of the back of your house. It is very, very overlooked by that proposal. So how do you feel about that level of overlooking?
As I've said, we're extremely worried about what's going to end up there, and it feels like it's just going to destroy everything we've tried to do ourselves. So that is our biggest concern, is the overbearing nature and the privacy. And moving windows around only solves so much. In the end, it's just too big.
I'm not seeing anybody else indicating, so thank you to both of you for making time to come this evening in person. That's much appreciated. And I understand we have the agent online as on the phone, Ed Mather. So could we contact Mr. Mather now, please, Nikki?
I think he's already unmuted himself, so.
Oh, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Would you like to introduce yourself, and then you've got up to 5 minutes to speak as well. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, members and chair. My name is Edward Mather from Colony Architects, representing the applicant this evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you, Alison, for your introduction. Obviously, this is the second time that a recommendation for approval has been brought to committee for this property. So I hope the members are familiar with the site's context and the application history. And I'm just going to move straight, frankly, onto the detail. Unfortunately, the last proposal, despite its merits and design ambition, was not considered suitable. But since then, we've taken stock, and through extended consultation with neighbours, that included meetings, pamphlet drops, letters, and discussions with officers, we gathered further opinion on the issues and tested these ideas to address these concerns to make the proposal more reflective of the character of the area and less impactful on the neighbouring properties. If I can just start by recapping on the previous scheme and how the issues have been overcome and how we've addressed the proposals in front of you today. I mean, I think first of all, I think there's an important in principle starting point here, and that is that I don't think anyone disputes that the site doesn't have development potential. I think the question really is about the development approach. And I'd like to just put it out there that even if fewer development units, houses were put to the site, I don't believe that the level of overlooking would be fundamentally altered from any proposal going on the site. Just putting out there. So anyway, the first main change was we've come from 12 units down to 10, which has also dropped the parking from 14 to 12 spaces. That's quite a significant reduction. There's also some significant changes to the appearance. The previous design was a sort of flat roof modernist building. And now we find ourselves with a traditional brick and render pitched roof design, very reflective of the recent flats in the area and some of the Victorian villas, rather than the 60s blocks that you see around the corner. If I can perhaps move on to the impacts on the neighbouring properties, mainly 16 and 29, there are four main ways we've adjusted the scheme to overcome this concern. So first of all, we've reduced the footprints on the back elevations by between 1 to 1.35 metres on all 4 rear elevations. It's quite a significant drop in size. The scale of the 2 wings that abuts number 16 and 29 are again very much more reduced in height, and they tailor off and slope down towards the neighbouring houses. All the balconies and primary habitable rooms are facing away from the neighbouring gardens onto Parkside Road and Westcott Road. And finally, the fenestration that faces the adjoining properties has been reduced in size, made obscured, and only serves bedrooms and bathrooms, in that, if they're not, to really limit the overlooking, basically. And finally, the building footprint has also come down. As I said, the back elevations have come in quite significantly. Each dwelling on the site has on average 70 square metres, excluding balconies, compared to the first scheme that had 53. So it's about a 32% increase in amenity. Obviously, since this was all presented in the main application, there's been a few other points that have been raised in the process through consultation. First one I'd like to just mention is the density point. So first of all, in the suburban character area, there's a 30 to 60 dwellings per hectare. Based on our area of 0.145 hectares, we should be having 8.7 units on the site, or perhaps 9. So we're only at one more, than that figure. So it's not an excessive figure, particularly when you factor in that Ashdean Gardens across the way has a dwellings per hectare of 86.8. So, you know, something of that density is not uncharacteristic in the area or out of character. The overall height was another concern, but again, we're on the corner, very similar to number 26 opposite, and we're tailoring away, stepping down towards the neighbouring properties to sort of ease that sort of relationship. There's some concerns with daylight, but we've got a BRE report and we're illustrating a great compliance there. There was a point raised by the neighbours about investment and selling the site. I'd just like to clear that up. We're just seeking investors that you would do in any scheme at this point in the process, even if there was a risk of planning not happening. It's not unusual, and that's why it's there. So anyway, I hope that I've clarified a few points there very quickly, and if members would like to ask any questions, I'd be happy to hear them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, thank you. I just, thanks for that. I just want you to...
Could you get your microphone a bit nearer?
Oh, okay. No worries. Is that all right? Can you hear me now?
Hello, yep.
Yep, nice one. It talks about some of the policies that you've mentioned, but they seem to be contested about the number of dwellings. But you're acknowledging that it is still over that, although you're saying it's not out of character, but it would be out of character on Parkside Road rather than Ashdean Gardens. That's the first question.
Well, I mean, obviously, you know, the dwelling density is only one measure of character. And as I say, I think if you think you've got a number of dwellings with a parking area and an amenity space to support that, and we are less than Ashdean Gardens, and if you go there, it doesn't feel cramped, overlooked, unspacious. I feel that we can offer the same spaciousness external to our building that is there, and I don't think that's overdevelopment or uncharacteristic of the area, really. That's my point. The flip side here on density points is we're obviously offering flats. Flats tend to be at a higher density. Ashdean Garden has flats and houses, and they're still at a higher density. Houses tend to be more land hungry, and I don't think necessarily the scale of the building would be any less if there was fewer houses. You catch my point?
Yeah, can I come back? So how do you reassure the residents, a number of residents who believe that this development is out of character with Parkside Road? I know there's a mention of Ashdean Gardens, but I think that's a bit different because it's it's not on Parkside Road. How can you reassure that the residents whose view is that there is out of character on that actual road?
Can I just, what point do you believe the character? I mean, there's a number of ways of judging character. I mean, there's the aesthetics, the materials, the form, the density. I mean, I can pick any one of those and illustrate where we're sort of compliant, if that makes sense. I mean, the Bupa care home, for example, only 2 doors away, is a significantly larger building than we are. We've adopted a similar form and shape than that, which is quite commensurate with the buildings all around. And likewise, some of the Victorian villas on Westcott Road, just to the sort of the east of the site. Again, we're a very similar form, scale, site density, and in relation to amenity to building. So in my mind, if you're ticking all the boxes of density, heights, materials, forms, aesthetics, I can't see why we're perhaps not commensurate with the area, really. I think the reference to Ashton Gardens was specifically on a density point, whereas I think it's a bigger assessment, really, than that.
No, thanks for that. I wouldn't mind raising some points with the officers, if that's all right later. No, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I mean, obviously, I remain to be convinced, but I thought you were going to ask me a question. I felt like Keir Starmer there, Boris was going to ask questions on PMQs, but thanks for not doing that. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Councillor Emberson, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the agent addressed most of the comments made by the objectors, but I think the only one he didn't pick up on was in terms of the reduction in just having 1 free bed, and the objectors did refer to that kind of inherently happening because it's less units overall, and I assume it's on the basis of viability, but I just wanted to give the agent opportunity to answer it.
Thank you. That is sort of correct. We do, I mean, I'm not sure it's always the case, but some boroughs, large 2 beds, because you can house 4 persons in the dwellings, can be considered family. I'm not sure Reading is quite on that position, but because we've got 2 large 2-bed and a 3-bed, in our mind, we feel like we're offering family accommodation, which I think is the sort of spirit of the 3-bed policy, basically. But also there is a viability aspect to this, and it all forms the design and the proposal today.
I'm not seeing anybody else indicating, in which case, can we thank you for your time, and we'll move on to comments from committee members. And I would invite colleagues to indicate. Councillor Carnell.
Thank you, Chairman. I would appreciate a comment from the officers regarding the density. We've heard varying estimates of 7, 8 or 9 dwellings would be appropriate according to the local plan. You're recommending acceptance of 10. Could you explain why that is, please?
Alison, are you there?
Sorry, I wasn't clear on the question there.
During the earlier conversations, figures have been raised that according to the density, according to the local plan, 7, 8 or 9 dwellings would be appropriate, but you're recommending acceptance of 10, which would be in contravention of the local plan. Perhaps you could comment on that.
So the guidance in the local plan, they're indicative density ranges. This scheme would be slightly over those indicative density ranges. I'm just trying to scroll to the section of my report. Paragraph 6.28, essentially there are other factors that you can sort of consider. So paragraph 4.4.8 of the local plan states that those indicative density ranges should not be applied as hard and fast rules, and there are characteristics of the site when judged against the criteria which may well mean that a density outside these ranges is appropriate. The character of that surrounding area is an important factor. It's also in a sustainable location, and sort of taken all of that into the round, it's not considered that that density is a reason to object to this application. It's not a hard and fast fixed, but it is it's an indication. And I think there are schemes, existing schemes within the area which are of a similar density and perhaps even higher density. So that was why I didn't consider in my assessment that the density was a significant issue and something that would, you know, warrant refusal just sort of on that basis.
Councillor Emberson.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted just to ask the planning officer in relation to the overlooking. Obviously, it's referred to in the report in terms of the change in the windows, but the agent claimed that the overlooking would be much the same for any development. Unfortunately, I was unable to make the site visit, and I just wanted commentary in terms of the overlooking and how this application in their eyes is an enhancement in terms of that aspect in regard to the neighbouring properties.
So there has been a change in the building footprint, both on the sort of section closest to 29 Westcott Road and also to 16 Parkside Road. The slide that's being shown at the moment shows two figures on each of the elements facing south, which is at the bottom obviously of the drawing, and to the east. The lower figure is what the previous scheme was achieving in terms of distances, and the higher figure is what this scheme would be able to achieve in terms of distances. And in my introduction, I was just sort of commenting, for example, that the sort of easternmost wing, so that's the one that's closest to 29 Westcott Road, has a similar relationship distance-wise to the shared boundary of 16 Parkside Road as the care home. And I did actually, there's a photograph there, but you can see how the on the bottom left there of this slide, you can see how the effect of trees obviously lessens the impact, but it's a similar distance to the care home in terms of its proximity to number 16. In terms of the windows themselves, I think that's on another slide, probably slide 3. So if you have a look at the middle, so at the top under the word elevations, you've got the middle two elevations there, and you'll probably just see the black dotted outline, maybe just, which is indicating on the top one the outline of 29 Westcott Road, and then on the bottom one 16 Parkside Road. So there has been a reduction in the number of the windows facing both of those properties, and I think it should be noted that 29 Westcott Road doesn't actually have any side-facing windows. So in terms of the element that's closest to them, those windows would be mostly looking directly at the side elevation, which is a blank elevation, and there would be some oblique views obviously possible into their garden, but not direct views. In terms of the windows facing towards 16 Parkside Road, again, there are fewer and smaller windows, and some of the rooms at the first floor level on the element closest to Parkside Road, which does have 16 Parkside Road, which does have windows on its side elevation. A couple of those are obscure glazed, but they are serving rooms that have got windows facing east and west as well. So in terms of all of that in combination, my view was that it was an improvement on the obviously on the previous scheme, and I feel that the relationship is reasonable within this suburban context, and particularly with the existing developments that are already around the site.
Councillor Robinson, then Councillor Stanford Beale, and then Councillor Rowland and Councillor Ennis.
Thank you, Chair. I do remember this, the previous application, and I raised the question of bats, as many will remember. I see that there was a report done, the Darwin Ecology Report, October 2021. It would have been good if that had been an appendices within the actual report that came through. But interesting to note that it does state a mitigation strategy is in there to ensure that the favourable conservation status of bats can be maintained. And a condition is recommended to ensure that the licence is obtained, obviously, to allow development. I understand that in the report they actually found evidence that there were 3 pipistrelle bat roosts using the roof of the building that is proposed to be demolished. My question is, what exactly is the mitigation strategy if you are taking away the actual house where these bats live and the roof where they live? What is the mitigation strategy for ensuring their conservation here? Because you are effectively making the bats homeless by removing this, this area. Pipistrelle bats need roofs because of the way they manage their temperature. So putting a roosting box on the side isn't really appropriate to this particular species of bat. So yeah, just interested in that part, if I can ask.
So obviously the scheme and that all of the reports with regard to the bats were reviewed, assessed by ecology. They were satisfied that the information that was presented in terms of bat boxes or other types of measures that you can introduce within a building would be satisfactory, as long as there was a condition that was requiring those. So I'm not a specialist on bat measures, as it were, but they were happy with the proposal and they had no objection to it. So I had no reason to consider it any differently in that regard.
Thank you. As long as we can follow the lesson of the law in terms of ensuring that the licence that is required under the habitat regulations is properly pursued. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stamford-Beale. I think you're next.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The agent said any proposal would result in overlooking. So say, because currently got a family home with an three garages extended and attached to them, plus a granny flat over the top of the garages. So if instead of building a block of flats in the back garden, they had decided to go for 2 semi-detached houses or even 2 small detached houses on the existing footprint of the building, how much extra overlooking would that have created? Because if we look at slide 16, no, not 16. Next one. When we look at the relation of where the that one there, right? So at the moment, the neighbour at 16 is looking at trees and blue sky. On the other side, he's looking at the nursing home. So he's going to have another big building on his other view. Yeah, whereas at the moment he's got trees and blue sky. That's the difference. So, would it have been economic? Can we ask the officer to replace the existing building with a pair of semi-detached or 2 small detached houses? Thank you.
I can't comment on the viability or the economics of it. I mean, obviously, in terms of whether it's houses or flats, yes, any development, unless it was a tiny single story, will have windows which have the potential, depending on how many trees and what time of year it is, to allow elements of overlooking. That's kind of a sort of normal relationship. And of course, at the moment, in terms of 16 Parkside, they themselves have got, they're overlooking, aren't they, the site as it stands directly, as well as perhaps obliquely from their rear windows. So I don't think that's an unusual arrangement. So I think, yes, any development scheme, unless it, as I say, were just a very, very squat, tiny little, house, would have overlooking. I can't, as I say, I can't comment on the viability aspects. That's something that maybe the agent would be able to come back on. But yeah, I think any scheme would be able to do that to a greater or lesser degree.
Pardon. Councillor Rowland, you're next, sorry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the very interesting comments on everyone's part with this second proposal at 18 Parkside. I wanted to comment on the fact that I attended the site visit for a second time. We had a site visit with the first proposal, and that at that time decided or helped me to decide against that initial proposal. And so I was very curious actually to go back and to look at this proposal and to see whether the concerns that we had and the reasons that we had refused in the first place had been mitigated. And I was actually quite dubious when I went there, but I have to say there were a couple of things that really caused me to think. The architect I think has done a reasonable job in taking on the challenges that we left him with last time. In both cases, with both of the residences on either side, he chose to step back, and he also chose to reduce windows, to cloud or obscure the windows so that you've got rooms that will still receive light, but they've got primary windows on either side. Balconies that were formerly overlooking were moved to the roadside so that they were not facing any of the residences around that. So I thought a lot of those things that were brought on board were really very, very good. So, a very good response, to be fair. And when I stood in the gardens, we went to both gardens, I felt like there was a proper recess or a reasonable recess from those two sites. The other situation that I was actually happy about was how the character of the area had been responded to in the style of the structure. It's completely redesigned. I do not think that it did not leave residents in the area with a comfortable feeling when it was the modern design that was proposed. And as a matter of fact, you could just feel the tension. People really did not want that. This fits in keeping with gables and odd kind of heights of roofs, much in in the scheme of the area. And so I was really pleased with that. I take on board the other points, like would anything not be noticeable? No, I mean, this is the answer. I did speak with the architect on the site during the day, and I said, what if you made it another 2 flats smaller or something? He did not seem to feel that size was going to come down appreciably. And I do take on board the fact that the officer has told us that in terms of density, it's not a hard and fast rule, and there is not, to me, sufficient, even though this is slightly over, that does not tip it over as far as I'm concerned in refusing this application at this time. Finally, I think the most important thing and the most indicative thing to me when I went on the site visit, and I thank Councillor Stanford Beal for actually being the one to say, let's go for a walk around the neighborhood. because I thought I knew Parkside Road and I thought I knew the other road on both sides, but I did not. And we took a good long walk around the road, and we looked at many of the buildings around there, and there are buildings that are every bit as large as this would be, even some quite old buildings that are of this size and of this scale. And there are also sporadically throughout the area buildings of 9 to 12 flats in the area. This is much more like a home. It's got parking, undercroft parking, so you're not going to be observing it the same way some of these other sites in the area are, with just parking sitting outside and everything. So I think that we do not have the ability here to refuse this application at this point, because I do feel that the architect has properly mitigated the questions that we asked, the challenges that we put forward, and has brought forward an application that I feel is appropriate for the area, and a product and a site that I believe will be actually of good comfort and good well-fitting within the area in the long run. So I'm actually going to be in support of passing the application this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ennis, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you. It's really a question for Alison, the officer. Is that what we got? I mean, it's a classic issue. I know Parkside Road well and I know the area well. Is that you've got residents who want in keeping with the originality of Parkside Road, which is semi-detached, detached houses. When you've got flats being built, that is a strong belief from that area that they're not in keeping, and it's very contested, Alison. So what would your view be on that? Is what actually is the keeping of character of Parkside Road? Is it the semi-detached, detached houses, or is it the building of flats?
I have to say that there are a whole range of different building types, and also some different functions. Obviously, it's predominantly residential, but you have got blocks of flats which date from, I don't know, maybe sort of 60s onwards within the area. You have small, I think further down Parkside Road, you've got even some bungalows. You've got large, more quite mature villas. You've got 2-storey houses, and I think the houses either side of this plot are probably some of the smaller, as it turns out, some of the smaller houses within the area. I'm sure there are other examples, but I don't think flats is uncommon. In this particular area. I think it does form part of the character, particularly. You've obviously got flats on Parkside Road itself, and you've also got flats on Westcott Road of all sorts of different styles and eras. Some flat roofs, some monopitch, some gables, etc., etc. So I would not say that flats are not in keeping with the character, and I think that the design is such where it has sought to reflect elements that are perhaps more traditional, more favoured perhaps by sort of residents, and I think it contributes. It's obviously a more modern scheme. It's not there to replicate, but I think it takes sufficient cues and elements from the overall character of the area, which, as I say, does include blocks of flats. It's not as if everything is houses and this is the first time. So that's my personal view as an officer on this scheme.
Thank you. That was a quite comprehensive answer, actually. Thank you.
Councillor Emerson, you wanted to come back, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. For me, I think that, you know, the objectors raised 3 issues, and I really do acknowledge the concerns that they raised, and we've had representations as a committee emailed to us as well, where, you know, local residents have really looked at our policies in terms of what we aspire to in terms of development, and, you know, my hat goes off in terms of them looking that up and sharing that with us in terms of their thoughts. My biggest concern with this was the overlooking. I think that would be the only basis from which you could potentially claim refusal on this application, but I feel reassured from the planning officer and the comments that she gave back to my question earlier. I think I very much support Councillor Rowland's comments, and I won't go over all of those again. I think that each application has to be considered in its own merit, and I think the application that came to committee last time was not appropriate whatsoever for their local area. In terms of Councillor Ennis's points, I think this is, you know, vastly improved and much more in keeping with the local context, which is quite diverse. I also think the new pitch roofs are a massive welcome improvement, and it means that in terms of those pictures that we see, you know, it is much more in keeping with neighbour properties. I also think, you know, it's really important that we note the policy compliant affordable housing, which was not provided for at the last application. And whilst, you know, that is not enough on its own to, you know, approve a scheme, that is very welcome. And that alongside the appraisal that has been outlined by the officer within the report, I think we must grant approval for this application, but I do acknowledge the concerns that residents have, and I appreciate them, but I don't see a basis to refuse this. I think in terms of the density, it was clearly explained to us that they are not hard and fast rules, they're mere guidelines, and the same approach in terms of family housing. And whilst it is regrettable that there is just the one free bed, it is inherent that that would happen with a smaller development proposal. So on that basis, I support this application, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anybody else indicating. So shall we move to a vote on this? All those in favour of granting this application? All those. Right, thank you. That's approved, and we move on then to the other applications. We go back to the right order now, which takes us back to item 11, the Kings Meadow Napier Road application, and it's Connie Davis to introduce this. It's on page 123.
Thank you, Chair. Temporary planning permission is sought for the temporary change of use of a portion of Kings Meadow to host the Best Parties Ever Christmas event. The land will be restored to its former use by the 31st of December 2021. This is an annual temporary Christmas event where Christmas parties take place within a temporary marquee that is erected on site. The information submitted under this application is in line with that provided and approved previous years, and the same conditions are proposed. No objections have been received from consultees, with necessary mitigation being secured by conditions. A further commentary dealing with potential noise issues is also contained in the update report. As you will note in the report, the conditions of the premise licence for the event will further allow the council to manage noise levels to ensure the event will not cause a nuisance to neighbouring residents. As such, the recommendation is to grant temporary planning permission subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Page, you were indicating.
Chair, yes, thank you. I was a member of the Planning Committee back in 2004 when we first approved a application for this use, and we gave it very thorough examination, and there was a great deal of detail, including the supporting management for highways, the parking, and for the management of the event, not only inside the marquees but also outside. And since then, the event has become very established, and I doubt if in that period we've had more than a dozen complaints about it, and indeed the concerns initially expressed by residents in the Napier Road flats have proved to be unfounded, and it has been a bit like Reading Rock Festival, an event that is now well experienced in terms of delivering the conditions that we have applied. I'm therefore happy to support the grant of a further temporary change of use on this site. With the exception of last year, we've had an event every year before Christmas. They've been popular, they've been well run, and as I say, they have occasioned minimal complaints from neighbours. And on the basis of their performance to date, the fact, as the officers just said, the conditions are the same as in previous years, I think we can be reasonably confident that they will be as well managed as in those previous years. So I'm happy to propose, Chair, that we grant consent on the basis outlined on pages 123 and 124.
Thank you. Councillor Josh Williams, you next, I think.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I don't want to go over it. I'm happy to second Councillor Page's recommendation. Can I just ask a question? Why is it 45 days? The extension is a temporary use for up to 45 days in a calendar year. We don't even have 45 days left before the 31st. Is that just a standard additional time frame, or is there, just for my own peace of mind, really, Chair?
Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, so on all the temporary planning permissions that have been granted, that's been the standard description of development. This application has come in a lot later in the year than it has previous years. So they won't be able to fulfil the 45 days that they have specified, as the end date is also included in the description. So it's come down to them submitting the application later than previous years, but not updating their description of development.
I guess COVID might have had something to do with that. I'm not seeing anybody else. You're right, Councillor Ennis, you're not indicating, no. Oh, okay. Well, not. Can I see all those in favour of this application? All those against? Any abstentions? One, thank you. So that's carried. Thank you very much. That takes us on to Catesgrove Primary School on page 149. And that's Connie Davis as well.
Thank you, Chair. Listed building consent is sought for works to the Grade 2 listed Simmons building at Catesgrove Primary School. The application is being presented as the applicant is Reading Borough Council. The proposed works include the replacement of rotting windowsills, along with repairs and repainting of drain pipes and repointing of brickwork where necessary. The scheme has been reviewed by the Council's Conservation and Urban Design Officer, who had no objections to the modest works. It is considered that the works would help protect and enhance the appearance of the historic building, whilst also improving the energy efficiency, as draft seals will be fitted to make the windows more airtight when closed. A condition will be attached requiring full material details to be submitted in due course. The recommendation is therefore to grant listed building consent subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody want? Councillor Rowland?
Fine, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, it should be a pretty quick application here, but what I wanted to understand, if I could, and I thought I'd ask for a clarification on this. We are in the middle of a climate emergency. This does look to be simply just a listed building consent like for like repair. But considering we're in the middle of a climate emergency, even Heritage needs to respond to the climate emergency. And I also understand the weighing of an entire building in terms of its overall thermal surety insofar as insulation, things like that. And windows do not always take the biggest part of that concern. But my question is what are we doing with like for like? I assume that what like for like means is single pane for single pane. And can I understand why a timber double glaze or a single pane with secondary glazing, which is quite often actually recommended in terms of a whole house kind of understanding and addressing windows, was not considered here? And then I might have a further point, Chair, if I could, but that's more a question for now. Thank you.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, so this application only deals with the repairs that are necessary to the windows. So from speaking with the agent, the primary concerns were the rotting window sills. There may be plans to upgrade the glazing in due course, however, that was not part of this application. And it's probably a question also for the education department, and it may also depend on funding or timeframes for the upgrades of the windows in those additional respects. But yes, as the application only concerns the urgent works that are needed to the windows, that is all we've considered at this stage. I'm not sure if Bruce may be able to provide a bit more information, as I see he's also on the call, our heritage officer.
I stayed around for this one because I thought there'd be some questions. Barnaby, what's his surname? I've forgotten now. The architect.
It's Barnaby Wheeler.
Wheeler is he's the consultant from Hampshire Building Services, and I've had a site meeting with him. We've had thorough discussions about putting in seals and just doing like-for-like repairs. So in this particular case, they're doing the right thing. That's Richard's note as well. So while we've been having discussions with the schools recently about repairs to the windows, in this case, I have no problem with this one because there is on the whole. So.
If I could, I would just like to make another point that listed building consent applications can only assess the impact on the heritage asset itself. So sustainability improvements can't be a direct consideration under this application type as they would be under a planning application. So therefore it hasn't been discussed in depth. But the draft seals that are proposed are a welcomed improvement on the efficiency situation.
Using sustainable methods, yeah.
Councillor Rowland, you're indicating again.
So are we saying that that despite the fact that the windows will essentially be rebuilt here, that there is either no funding or no capacity here to do the right thing for the environment on this, with insofar as double glazing or secondary glazing? And was secondary glazing ever approached as a possible answer, which is less expensive indeed than double glazing?
I think what they were saying is it didn't preclude doing secondary or further work, is what was being said, that they hadn't been considering that particular aspect, but it doesn't preclude it happening in the future. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So technically, if they're doing like for like, they don't need approval, but because they're putting in seals, that is very, very minor development aspect. It's 3/4 doesn't need approval, Do we have a materials condition?
Yes, so there would be a pre-commencement condition securing material details, which we will need to discharge in due course.
We'll pick it up there if we need to, if there's anything strange happening.
Councillor Rowland, and I've also got Councillor Stamford Beale indicating, but Councillor Page, then is it on this?
Chair, yes, I think we as elected members have another route to address the concerns very legitimately raised by Councillor Rowland, and that is as the council and the client and via Hampshire, we need to discuss and get a better idea from them about the approach they are taking with regard to buildings of this sort, and particularly when there are new window replacements. It's clear that we're not talking replacement whole windows here, which is a different ballgame. I had misunderstood. I thought that we were talking new windows here. We're not, and therefore the points that are made are understood. But it does raise a legitimate concern of what if and when we have wholesale replacements, the standards that are going to be applied, and that's something that we can pursue via another route through the Borough Council with the Education Department. And I would suggest we have that we make some sort of minute or reference that takes this matter forward so we don't lose it. And that on the back of this application, not as a condition obviously, but as an informative internally, or however we phrase it, we ask for further details about the approach that is being adopted with regard to schools, the windows, environmental standards, insulation, sustainability and all the rest of it, and that then be pursued through other routes.
I think this is a best practice example of how they should do it on other schools.
Yeah, but only on repairs, Bruce. It's not it's not the good example. If these were completely new timber windows, we would be looking for double glazing, for example.
In this case too, which is it's a listed building application, so therefore they have to follow the proper rules.
We understand
that.
Yeah,
thank you.
I agree with you. Council does need a policy and approach with the schools for future sustainability issues. That's been ongoing for the last 6 months.
Councillor Stamford Beale, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you. As I know you're a former teacher, one of the big things that's been talked about is, because we are in the middle of a pandemic, is ventilation in schools to prevent the spread of COVID. And if we carefully replace, refurb these windows and put nice seals in, so you don't have the air coming in, you're actually going to reduce the ventilation. So I think it's something that we need to look at. As Councillor Page has already said, we ought to look at it in future. We need to look at the ventilation in schools as well, not just the thermal efficiency of windows.
Yeah, if they're done properly, they should still open.
Absolutely. Well, they wouldn't be done properly if they didn't. Councillor Leng, you were indicating.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Speaking as a humble carpenter and looking at some of those pictures in the thing, I think repairs of that would be very much like Trigger's broom, so it's, yeah, I've done plenty of heritage work, and things change as you dig deeper into the job. So repairs can soon become replacements, especially if there's day work involved, shall we say. Right, okay, thank you. No, I can't. No.
One of the conditions that we do is recommend that the works be carried out by properly experienced and trained craftsmen.
Yeah, we are only joking.
Touche.
Councillor Rowland, you want to come back?
Then in this case, then I'm happy to recommend approval of this, not losing Councillor Page's very valid point about addressing this, because they are case-by-case situations, but the materials and specifications to be approved, I'm going to assume, are carried out by professional officers, and I know Mr. Edgar is a professional officer and he does understand the particular materials and specifications could be required, but I might but I might just reiterate that and possibly even include ward councillors or something, but I don't really know that that's necessary. I think that just picking this up in the future is more important.
No, absolutely. And
okay, thank you.
And Julie's been making copious notes while you've all been talking, so I think the point is well made, and it's something we need to think about, not just on schools, but on all our buildings. So,
officer level, the councillors' support for the future is very helpful.
Thank you. Right. Can I see all those in favour of granting this application? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Get that thing to come on again. It takes us on to item 15, which is 65 Kiln Road, which was deferred from last meeting for a site visit. And I believe that Connie Davis is going to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for a new chalet bungalow in the rear garden of 65 Kiln Road. As just mentioned, the application was originally presented to the Planning Application Committee on the 3rd of November 2021, where the resolution was to defer the application for a member site visit following a discussion of a number of matters, namely the proposed access track to the site, impact on neighbouring amenity, biodiversity impacts, and the tandem arrangement with the existing dwelling on site. A site visit was carried out on the 25th of November 2021. Since the previous meeting, a few additional representations have been received, and these are noted in the reports for this meeting, along with further commentary on biodiversity enhancements to the site. The recommendation remains unchanged and is to grant permission subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members got questions, comments?
Sorry, comments if there are no other questions. Right, so we went on a site visit and we saw that they had cleared the front garden so that you could get a car on the left-hand side of the property, but we did notice that to the left-hand side of the property was currently green grass. It wasn't a track at all, it was part of the garden, and the space to the rear of the garden, which is currently white on that plan, was laid to a patio with slabs on, and then to the side where the proposed trackway is, there was a small, what looked like a swimming pool, but apparently it had been planted out as a garden pond with flag irises, etc., but that had now been filled in with rubble. So we feel, or I feel very strongly, that this is an example of tandem development, and under policy H11, development of private residential gardens, the policy is that proposals for new residential developments include land within the tutelage or the former tutelage of a private residential garden will only be acceptable where the proposal does not lead to tandem development. This is clearly tandem development because it is a dwelling being built behind another dwelling where the rear building having no frontage and being accessed by a private road or trackway alongside the front building. Clearly what we see before us. Also, here, section 5 of policy H11 is the design and layout minimises exposure to existing private boundaries to the public areas and avoids the need for additional physical security measures. The properties to the side, both on Venetia Close and on Kiln Road, feel that they are being interfered with by having that trackway down the side of their garden fences. And so they feel that there is a significant detrimental impact to the amenity of their properties, which is point 6. And then point 8, by taking out and making to the side of the property on the left what is currently green shrubs and green grass, that would be it would be impacting the biodiversity of the site, where it would lead to fragmentation of the garden blocks, and therefore any wildlife that we have in Clayfield Copse, which is directly opposite, would not be able to use this garden to be able to traverse the local area of Emma Green. which is an area where we have large houses on large plots. So for all the above reasons, I feel that we should be moving a motion to refuse planning permission. Thank you.
Councillor Rowland, you were indicating.
Thank you, Chair. The situation with the site, and I did go on the site visit, became to me more one of ensuring that biodiversity situation on that site was properly mitigated, and that the end result would be a biodiversity net gain at least, or at least a neutral situation. Taken it as it is, and as Councillor Stanford Beale described, the left driveway that we all assumed was a driveway, I think when we were at the last meeting, is a 3-meter high bit of shrubbery that runs actually from Clayfield Copse all the way over. There seemed to be, and also on the understanding that the developer had cleared off a lot of the land. There seemed to be a lot of biodiversity possibilities there, I should say. However, and on balance, that may sit down there and say that there would be the possibility of refusing this application if indeed we could not meet all of the mitigating factors why we have H11. However, the biggest thing to me, and the biggest understanding of this, is that the developer, the owner of that site, can, because there are no TPO trees and there is nothing to stop him, can plow that entire property down to nil, put it to grass, and essentially we have a real it's not a loss when you've got it just a grass land, but we will have lost opportunities for butterflies, for bees, for birds, and things like that might be resting in the brush. The fact of the matter is that developer could do that tomorrow, and there's nothing that we can do about that. I think that unfortunately, therefore, on balance, as much as I see what there is now, I think I have to agree with the officer on this point and say that there's no reason why we should not be able to grant this evening, given what I observed there at the site visit. So my support will be with granting permission. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I too was on the site visit. Yes, concerns about biodiversity, but for me, and I'd like to thank not only the owner of the property for allowing us to go and have a tour around the proposed development site, but also to the neighbours. And, you know, having seen firsthand, you know, the closeness in terms of proximity of the development, plus hearing, you know, what this means in terms of the effect it will have on their lives, the detrimental effect, and also we've been shown today an image of what it looks like from behind, from you know, the neighbour and the view of the house overseeing his garden as well. You know, there were certainly strong concerns raised. You know, for me as well, when I'm looking through this report, policy H11, the proposal makes a positive contribution to the character of the area in terms of. I've seen no positive contribution listed whatsoever in this development. The other thing, and this is very important, and it was mentioned by Wendy Baddison at the last meeting we had, was the fact that, you know, a lot of the reasoning behind this initially, or this proposal initially being recommended for granting, was down to a previous case whereby another property around the corner, another development, back on the 19th of November 2019, in Autumn Close, you know, we refused based upon the tandem development, but also on other factors that were mentioned, and that was overturned on appeal. Wendy mentioned that that decision should have no bearing whatsoever on what we do and the decisions we make on this committee. I feel that a lot of emphasis was placed on that, which I think is wrong. We, in our local plan, have that tandem development should not be something that should be, you know, performed in our area. So therefore, you know, we should be refusing this application, definitely, on the grounds of, you know, this is clearly tandem development taking place. And yes, it's been mentioned, if we say yes to this, there could be other elements cropping up and other, you know, such developments, and that would not be good for our neighbourhood, or for, you know, for the way that we manage planning in Reading. So, you know, I am certainly going to be voting against the recommended action. We've seen the detrimental effect that this will have on the neighbours, and I would urge all other fellow councillors on the committee to do the same. Thank you.
Councillor Josh Williams, you're next.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I have to follow that, do I? I haven't marshalled my thoughts in the way that some other members have, and I perhaps should have, but I think this one is really finely balanced, Chair. I don't think it does suddenly tip one way or the other, and I hope that no one is critical of members for taking different views, because I think you could easily come down on one side or the other of this one. So I also went on the site visit, which I thought was well worth doing, because standing in that ground is very different to seeing photos on the website or on this report, I thought. The two key issues for me have already been mentioned. The biodiversity, I think that the report and the update report have worked through in detail, and in fact the application gives us a chance to achieve a biodiversity gain where it's possible. As Councillor Rowland said, this could all be mowed down tomorrow in theory, down to some bricks and some mud and some rocks in a big square hole, and that would be very sad. The other thing that is much more difficult to address is the tandem development. What I see is that people have called this development a track down one side of this property, but it doesn't feel like a track. It feels like a road to me, Chair, not a driveway. It feels like a mini close being developed alongside one house to access one at the rear, and that troubles me a great deal. It obviously troubled officers and members when the local plan was put together. It didn't trouble one planning inspector quite so much, and they insisted that we should see the harm in it rather than just it being harmful in of itself. So I gave this a lot of thought. I thought the site visit very valuable, and in this case my only concern with this is the tandem development, and I think on balance all of the other issues outweigh that, and we can't justify harm in refusing this. So I'm going to support Councillor Rowland on this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Carnell, you were indicating.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a quick observation and a question. Firstly, I think it's a shame that in this climate emergency, where one neighbour has made an effort of his own initiative to perhaps reduce his carbon footprint, reduce his use of fossil fuels, is seeking to put a solar blanket across his swimming pool, this development would potentially put it into shade, thus increasing his use of fossil fuel. And there's a question. earlier on we heard that some elements of the local plan are only indicative. We've heard a lot of discussion about H11 regarding tandem development. Is that indicative? And what reasons are there really to justify overruling it if it's not? Thank you, Chairman.
I'll ask the officers to respond to the tandem development point. Councillor Emberson, you've indicated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Williams actually summed up kind of how I feel about this, although I obviously voted against the site visit last time because I felt I had enough information at that stage to make a decision. I think it is tricky. I think in terms of what colleagues have said tonight, the only actual reason for refusal I've heard come from members behind is on the basis of biodiversity. I've only heard reasons not to agree it rather than reasons to actually refuse it. And for me, on the biodiversity, I'm satisfied from the update report and from those members that were able to go along in terms of what the officer recommendation is. I also feel, as Councillor Williams said, in terms of the tangent development, you know, it is a difficult one. I acknowledge Councillor Robinson mentioning what was said last time in terms of making our decision, and you know, we consider each application on its own merit, and it's prudent for the officer to have pointed out regarding previous appeals, but that is not a reason to refuse it in its own right. But for me, you know, this is a new home, there is an affordable housing contribution, and it's on otherwise unused land, and I can't see a reason to refuse this from the comments made this evening. So on that basis, I would urge members to approve this.
Thank you. Not seeing anybody else, so could we ask for a response from officers on this question of the tandem development?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So whilst policy H11 states that development should not lead to tandem development, officers considered that other considerations potentially could outweigh this part of the policy. So it's not disputed that the proposal is in a tandem arrangement. However, it's the view that the tandem arrangement still allows suitable site access, building layout, and plot size for the new dwelling. And this is also the case with other examples of tandem development within the borough. As mentioned by councillors earlier, when assessing proposals, the level of harm that may arise needs to be a main focus. If tandem development results in harm, this can be used as a basis and justification for resisting proposals. However, it's concerned in this case that the tandem arrangement is not considered to cause substantial harm in terms of character of the area, neighbouring amenity, or the natural environment to a degree that would warrant refusal of the scheme. So it's therefore on that basis that because the proposal is considered to result in less than substantial harm, combined with the positive elements of the scheme, that the tandem arrangement could be justified in relation to policy H11. I hope that helps.
Julie Williams wants to add a bit as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think also to comment on the point that Councillor Comments made about the reference to the previous appeal decision, and that you were saying that that weighed too heavily in the balance, you felt, in the officer report. I just had a look again at the officer report, and that is at paragraph 6.10 in the original report where that reference is made. And although Connie draws attention to that previous appeal decision, she also goes on to say that each case needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis to assess the level of harm that would be created. And in this particular case, given the plot size, building line and other examples of once backland development in Venetia Close, the proposal is considered justifiable in relation to the very surrounding context. So as such, it is not considered that this tandem development is unacceptable in this specific instance, and there would be insufficient harm to justify refusal on this basis. So I think what the case officer did in the previous report was to explain that we had this recent situation where these points were made, and so then she sort of looked at this situation using that argument and come to that decision. I don't think she was saying that because of that previous appeal decision we have to now approve every tandem development in the borough. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody else indicating, so can we move to a vote on this? All those in favour of the officer recommendation? Thank you. And all those against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. That is carried. Thank you. Mic again. Actually, you press it and it doesn't come on. We're going on to item 16, which is 6 Circuit Lane, which was also deferred from the last meeting on page 271. And David Brett, I believe, is going to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. The proposed development is for a single-storey side extension at 6 Circuit Lane. At your November meeting, a consideration of this planning application was deferred in order to seek additional information on the policy for considering applications for new vehicle crossings and drop curbs, where grass highway verges would be removed. The assessment of drop curb crossings is undertaken against Reading Borough Council's vehicle crossing policy, with the latest version being adopted at the Strategic Environment Planning and Transport Committee in November 2018. This clarifies the amount of grass verge that would be an acceptable loss and what construction detail would be required for each scenario. This ensures a consistent approach in assessing drop curb crossings by officers with input via Reading Borough Council Transport with the Council's vehicle crossing policy. Overall, officers are content with the amount of grass verge removed in this instance and continue to recommend approval of this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very helpful deferral, really. Councillor Ennis, so sorry, all I can see is Councillor Leng's head. Your arm is up.
I bet that's very attractive. Thank you. No, I really appreciate the deferral and then the clarification. You know, we can argue about the length, we can argue about the loss, but I totally get what's been said here and respect that. And we wouldn't want to have an argument about a really valuable council property being turned in and supported for vulnerable tenants. So happy to move forward and recommend that we support recommendation of this and to acknowledge actually that every case has got to be seen on its own merit rather than a catch-all inch by inch loss of green space. But I thought the argument was worth having. Thank you.
Councillor Josh Williams, my thing is, it takes about 3 presses to come on. Councillor Josh Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to Councillor Ennis for suggesting this deferral. I think the additional information has been really valuable, so thank you. Just one quick question. 4.2 says that transport officers have confirmed the drop curb shown is wider than it is required for the site. As Councillor Ennis said, I don't argue over inches, but why is it wider than required for the site? Why is it not just the right width as required for the site? I just didn't understand that bit.
Do you want to come back on that? Darren Cook's there, I think, as well. Darren, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, happy to come back in, Chair. I think it's just shown on the drawing as a little bit wider than what is required. We've obviously highlighted that within our comments as on part of the application. I think when the licence is actually applied for, because they will need a highways licence to undertake the work, the works can be modified to closer to what is actually required. So although it is wider, it can be reduced down to what it should and what it would need to be. So I think it's just that's shown on the drawing, and that would be fine as part of the license to kind of reduce that down.
Could we just add that as an informative, Chair? Would that be okay? So that's logged, not as a condition, of course, but just an informative. So that goes with the approval?
Don't see why not. No, thank you. I'm not seeing anybody else. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lang.
Yeah, it's just thank you, Chair. It's just to clarify a point. It states in 4.2 the loss of grass verge is 15.4 metres. Is that the whole verge from the road to the gate, as in 15 square metres, or is it the grass verge of 15 square metres? Because in previous applications for drop curbs and such, we've been told that the limit was 7 square metres of grass. Just want a clarification on that.
Darren, do you want to come back on that? Thank you.
Yeah. The measurement itself is the grass verge, so within the highway extent itself. So that there may have been previous discussions in terms of other sites, and I think that's where the policy has come into place, so that it's definitive of exactly what is required and in what scenario it can be normal tarmac and what's porous tarmac and when's that required. So it's kind of abundantly clear to everyone exactly what can be approved and what needs to be provided. So in this instance, it's 15.4 square metres within the highway verge itself. So it's just that grass verge.
Okay, so we're just clarifying that, in effect, we're taking a case-by-case basis and looking at it on an individual basis, yeah?
It would be looked on an individual basis in terms of what is the loss of grass verge. The policy itself would give limits of what's acceptable to be normal tarmac, which is about 8 square metres. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's around 8 square metres or something. And then above that, it would then have to be the porous tarmac that would need to be provided. And then above 15 square metres, we're kind of getting into the territory of what would be an issue. We're obviously only 0.4 over what that would be, but we'd obviously have to look at that more closely as to what is actually being provided and why. But yeah, it's individual case-by-case basis, but there's parameters that would need to be adhered to that are within that drop curb policy.
Thank you, very helpful. Thank you.
I'm not seeing anybody else indicating, so can we move to a vote on this? All those in favour of the recommendation? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Takes us on to the final item, which is
was that including the informative as well?
Sorry?
Just to check, that was including the informative as well, suggested by Josh.
Sorry, I didn't. Oh, the informative. Beg your pardon. Yeah, take that.
Yeah, just checking.
I believe Councillor Emberson abstained due to.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, should have reminded people of that.
Yeah,
she did say a long time ago she would be not taking part in the vote because of her position as lead councillor for housing. Apologies. Right, that takes us on to item 17, last item, land east of Pinson's Lane, Tilehurst, which is in fact in West Berkshire. And Richard Etoff, I think, is going to just speak to this one. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report on the agenda is to advise Planning Applications Committee of the amendments to the outline hybrid planning application within West Berkshire on the land at Pinson's Hill, Calcott. There are a number of changes to the planning application submitted to WBC, but the most notable is that the number of dwellings being applied for has been reduced from 265 to 165. Since the publication of the main agenda report, the Transport Development Control Manager has reviewed the information on the West Berkshire website and has provided officers with his comments summarised as follows. The proposal is a hybrid application comprising the following elements. It's an outline application for up to 165 dwellings on the western part of the site and a mixed-use building providing 450 square metres floor space in use class D1 to provide a community use. The applicant has provided a transport assessment and numerous addendums to accompany the planning application. These have been assessed with the junctions within West Berkshire District. In summary, his advice is that the levels of daily trips identified would not be detrimental to traffic flow within Reading Borough, which would further be diluted with trips using both the A4 Bath Road or Langley Hill. As such, RBC, as the adjacent highway authority, has no objections to the proposal. The report on the agenda also covers matters of impact on landscaping, open space and infrastructure, but as reported previously, RBC does not object on these matters. So the officer recommendation is as stated in the main report. RBC does not raise an objection to the planning application as amended. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stanford-Beale.
Thank you. Can I just ask the officer, as we have declared a climate emergency and we are supposed to be promoting sustainable transport, as in bus trips and walking and cycling, will this outline planning permission include roads that are wide enough to get a bus down so they can run a bus route and to have an appropriate either loop system or a turning area to get the bus out of the new estate? Thank you.
Richard.
I'm not sure if there is diversion of existing bus services to meet this new development. Darren Cook has looked at this in detail. Darren, do you know if the present bus services that go down to Sainsbury's would be diverted?
I'm not suggesting present services. The question was, is the infrastructure proposed? Could it take a bus if a bus was required in the future? Because we need to future-proof things, and equally we need to be aggressive with developers to get community infrastructure levy in to support bus services when houses are first built, so people don't drive cars, which causes congestion and poor air quality and is detrimental to our climate emergency.
Yeah, Darren, can you comment, please?
Yeah, I'm just going back. So, through Chair, I don't looked at the exact layout in detail, or looked at whether bus services would be kind of run through the site, because obviously that would be for West Berkshire to determine with the application within their borough. I've only looked at it in terms of the impact on our network. So looking at the site itself and the layout that's on that image within the presentation, it doesn't look as if there is a potential loop that a bus would go round, but obviously the site would have to accommodate refuse vehicles and fire appliances to make sure they can access the site. But it doesn't look as if there's any specific loop that a bus would be able to get around that site. So that's all I can kind of advise at this time.
So, Councillor Stanford-Beale, are you suggesting we make comment, or that they might want to consider this, or?
Well, maybe we could ask them to consider that.
We could do
Yeah.
That would be.
Yeah, do you want me to? Yeah, to answer. Yeah, yes, certainly. We'll be sending our comments to West Berkshire. It's not us making the decision, obviously, but we can pass on our comments regarding that, as we do sometimes about, remember ecological matters and things like that. So yeah, we can pass that on.
Not seeing anybody else. So can we agree the recommendation? All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. And